Hello my friends, I hope you're having a lovely day, and in today's video we're going to talk about something that was brought to my attention last week, but I wanted to take the weekend to really mull it over and think about it before I jumped on it. This was brought to my attention by Jason Cirillo on Twitter, and it's about NPR. I've listened to a lot of NPR stuff on my own and through my fiance as well because she's a huge fan. I've heard lots of interesting and entertaining and engaging pieces on a whole number of topics. Some of it's a little too dry for me, but I can still appreciate it. And in one of their most recent features on the show, This American Life, they talked a little bit about video games for the opening segment of an episode called Save the Girl. They say people go on missions to save young girls from danger, but sometimes they get so caught up in the mission that it overshadows the girl herself. So the opening discussion pertains directly to video games and actually a game that was released on Switch not all that long ago, and technically it's the first time Nintendo fans can officially play this game. They talk about Final Fantasy VII. The scene that's the focus of this opening discussion on This American Life is the death scene of Aeris in Final Fantasy VII at the hands of Sephiroth. Certainly a notable moment in game history, a moment a lot of people didn't see coming, something that's still remembered to this day, a very impactful moment. But during this 7-minute segment, there's one little bit of discussion in general that seems to be making most video game fans angry. I'm going to play you that segment in full. It's not long at all, but I'll play you the full segment and then we're going to talk about it.
And what was it about this character that was so intense?
Well, okay, so I have no idea. To me, it made no sense. She's like this one-dimensional girl. She's a cartoon. Like, at the time, it was a big deal that she was 3D. So, like, she looked, I guess, believable, but she kind of looks like a Mario character. And it doesn't make sense to me that all of these boys would cry over it.
Right off the bat, one point I do agree with is the assertion that Aeris is a one-dimensional character. I agree with that. There's really not a lot to her, but I will say what we do get, I feel, is enough to warrant the reactions that people had. Only because they certainly didn't see it coming. She is the motivation, a lot of the motivation for going forward, not just for the characters in the game, but for the player as well, because we knew so little about her, yet she seems like such a wonderful person, and to see her taken away like that, it makes you angry. It gives you what you need to push forward and see the game through to the end. So even though she is one-dimensional as far as who she is and what we really know about her, I think what she serves in the game is a very important purpose to the overall experience. It's the next part of the conversation that gives me the most trouble, and I've been trying to figure out a way where it makes sense to me, and it simply doesn't. The co-host talks about how Final Fantasy VII, I guess in general, looks like a cartoon, or maybe specifically just the characters look like a cartoon. They don't look believable, look sort of Mario style. And she goes on to say that it was 3D, and perhaps, and since that was a big thing at the time, perhaps that led into why people had the reaction that they did. And that's just a mind-boggling approach to me. I really don't understand it at all. I think if you ask most people who had a visceral or emotional reaction to that scene today why they had that, they wouldn't talk about the visuals of the game. I can't say 100% wouldn't, because I'm sure there's some people who would mention it, but I'd say by and large, the reason why people felt so strongly about that moment is because of what actually happens in the moment. It was a character they cared about, loved, liked, whatever. It was a moment they didn't expect to happen. They just, I would think most people weren't expecting her to die right there. And it just happens so quickly, and that's it. It's done. She's gone. It was just so surprising and shocking. And a lot of people, even though she was one-dimensional, had some sort of feelings for that character. They felt attached to her in some way. So, yeah, it was an emotional moment for people, and it has nothing to do with the way the game looks, or I should say almost nothing. I'm willing to bet most people would not say the visuals had anything to do with it. It was the story that was being told that moved people. It wasn't the next step in visuals that gave people such a crazy reaction that would stick with them for so many years later. And this whole line of thinking begs a question for the co-host as well. Anything that looks, I guess, non-realistic or cartoonish, does that mean it's not capable of providing moments that would lead a viewer or whoever's experiencing it to cry or have some sort of, major emotional reaction to it? There's certainly plenty of animated feature films and TV shows that have had people cry and laugh and be scared and all the ranges of emotions out there. And some of those shows may take a realistic approach in their cartoon visuals, but they're still cartoons. And then others have very traditional cartoon style designs. There's nothing that anybody would ever equate to realism. And those, I've had those moments. I've talked to plenty of people who have cried at certain animated feature films. I mean, look at Disney's body of work. For the general public, a lot of people have teared up at a lot of those movies, but they are animated. They are not realistic as far as what you're visually seeing goes. And it almost sounds like this co-host would be in disbelief of that you're watching something on screen that simply doesn't look real or doesn't look real enough, and she wouldn't be able to understand why you could have such a strong reaction to it. I'm just trying to pick apart where she's coming from because I have such a struggle trying to make any sense of it, and perhaps it is just tied to visuals. Maybe she really doesn't get anything from pieces of entertainment that don't look realistic, whatever she considers to be realistic or realistic enough. I guess you could look at Final Fantasy VII as far as cutscenes and in-game graphics go and not consider that realistic, but still look at something like an animated show and find it realistic enough to get engaged with the programming and have some sort of reaction to it. But I would find that really sad and disappointing. I'd love to pick her brain on it more because I've played thousands of games over my life, and I've had a lot of experiences where I've had a really emotional reaction. Crying or heartwarming or anger or whatever, and that's all from the gameplay and the interaction between characters, the story all mixed together. There are very few games where the visuals had anything to do with my emotional reaction, but it wasn't anything that made me had a bad experience or took me out of the experience, because I feel like it's artistic interpretation, and some of that was limited to what the hardware could do, certainly, but other times it's what the developer wants to do. So any games where I felt visuals have led me to an emotional experience along with the other components, perhaps something like Eco or Journey, games that are just, really beautiful and evocative in certain ways, certainly add to the overall tones that the game is telling through gameplay and story. So I can see that. But I've had, plenty of experiences with games that look 8-bit or 16-bit, and that goes for back in the day to now too, where they've made me tear up and they've made me really sad, or really make me like contemplate things or feel depressed or sullen, like 2064 Read-Only Memories Integral, which is a new game, newish, within the last few years, and it certainly doesn't use visuals that you would say are realistic by any way, shape, or form, and still that game will forever stick with me because of the things it made me feel and the stuff you experience in the game. It's something that I'm going to take that with me for the rest of my life. It makes me think about things differently now. Something like Thomas Was Alone, which is just squares and rectangles. It's just shapes. The whole game is just shapes, very basic shapes, but it tells a really sweet, sad, endearing, heartwarming story, motivational story, and that game's gonna stick with me because of the way that it married gameplay and story and all of that together. It just made something absolutely phenomenal. So I guess if she needs the realism in graphics, at least for video games, then she's going to miss out on a lot of really amazing content out there. The question really opens up a whole can of worms, because I want to know how she feels about books as well. Like, can people have emotional reactions to books? Does she have emotional reaction to books? Does she think that just nonsense, or do books make more sense for her because she can use her imagination to come up with a in-mind visual that looks appropriate for her, so she can map the reaction onto that? And I certainly think gamers use imaginations as well, because yes, you may see what a character looks like on screen and then picture that in your mind, but there are other gaps in story and other characters and other places and things that people will imagine in their own mind. And imagination was also a big part of games back in the day, and games today that use more simplistic visuals as an art style choice, because they were more rudimentary, so you would imagine them in your head either as the official character artwork or whatever you thought they would look like if they were drawn in a more realistic or fleshed out way. The questions just keep coming about this one little statement. The co-host also goes on to say that she doesn't understand why all these boys would cry over a moment like this, and I'm not quite sure why she phrases it like that, because boys didn't just cry over this moment, girls cried over it as well. I know a whole bunch of girls who played this game back in the day, or more recently, and had the exact same reactions or something very similar. They cried, they felt sad, they felt angry, all that stuff, and it's a moment that stuck with them. I don't know why she's just trying to figure out, in general, why boys were so moved by such a one-dimensional character, in her words, and how it makes any sense, and maybe she's saying that women wouldn't have that reaction overall. I don't know. I don't want to get into that whole messy conversation about, boys versus girls or anything like that. I just felt it was a weird statement to make at the end of the segment. So that's pretty much all that is said in the segment that made people upset, but it leads me to my biggest point. I don't understand how you could be in a position where you have not experienced a form of entertainment, yet you are trying to judge the people who are having certain reactions to it. It's very clear she never played Final Fantasy VII. Unless I'm wrong, if I'm mistaken, I'll correct that, but it certainly sounds like she doesn't have any real knowledge of the game. And yet she's like, I don't understand why these boys reacted like this. I don't understand why it's such a big deal. You're judging a reaction to something you've never experienced for yourself. Who knows what you would have if you actually played the game? And yes, I understand that it's difficult for someone who never plays games to just be like, here, jump into Final Fantasy VII. I get that. But you could watch someone play it, and I'm not even saying you have to play the whole game. You could just watch up to that particular moment, which is a decent amount of content to be sure. But still, I just find it, I don't know, I want to say rude, but I don't want to sound rude. But I find it surprising that someone would, pick apart this scene and say, like, I don't understand why these people had this reaction. It makes no sense to me. But they've never had the experience themselves. They never played the game. I wouldn't say that about movies or TV shows or music. I might be like, I've never played that thing. I've never seen that thing. I don't understand why you have that reaction, but I'm coming from a place of ignorance because I haven't experienced what you did. So perhaps if I went through it, I would arrive at somewhere similar when all was said and done. Just to come out there, it sounds like a very minor amount of research to make such a grand statement like that. And it really bugs me because, honestly, I would think something like this is above most of NPR. They wouldn't make such broad, sweeping statements like that when they haven't even experienced it. You wouldn't review a movie if you haven't seen a movie. You wouldn't review an album if you haven't listened to it. You wouldn't review a book if you haven't read it. So why would you judge or comment on the people who have consumed that media and say that their reaction doesn't make sense when you don't know what went into building that reaction? Alright, I've said my long-winded piece on this NPR piece. I'm trying to get in touch with the co-host to talk to her about it because I honestly want to know. I never do these pieces to be mean or angry or rude or try and, get one up on the other person. I just, it's out there and people are talking about it and I'm giving my 2 cents. So I'm trying to reach out to her. I would love to have some sort of discussion. Hopefully it'll happen. I mean, I'd love to talk to her on our podcast or in a video feature like this. I don't know, whatever the case might be. I will keep you updated if anything happens. But for today, that's where we're at. Thanks for watching, liking, subscribing, and commenting. It's very much appreciated. A huge thank you to our Patreon members because you guys are supporting things like this. You make everything I do through and on and around Go Nintendo possible. So Really, thank you very much for your support. It's greatly appreciated. If you want to check out the Patreon, there's a link in the description. But for today, that's it. So until tomorrow, have a good day, have a good evening, and I'll see you in a few short hours.